A billionaire pretended to be a janitor for 3 years, only to leave his fortune to the one person who cared. Day after day, he pushed his cart through polished hallways, sweeping floors no one thanked him for. Most people ignored him. Some mocked him. To them, he was invisible, just a man with a mop. But in silence, he was watching, testing character, studying who could see him as more than the uniform he wore. And when the truth finally came out, his final decision shattered every assumption. It all began the very first day someone noticed the quiet man in the hallway. The first week at the company was unforgettable. The place pulsed with movement and sound phones ringing, keyboards clattering, footsteps echoing across polished tiles. The air smelled of burnt coffee and raw ambition, the kind that made every hallway feel like a race course. People hurried past one another without making eye contact, briefcases swinging at their sides, voices sharp and urgent as they chased deadlines and opportunities. It was a world too fast to stop for anyone, least of all a man with no title, no power, no status. And that was when he appeared. He looked nothing like the others. An older man in a faded uniform, its original color long since lost to countless washes. His shoes were worn thin at the soles, and the cart he pushed rattled and squeaked with every step. A mop leaned against one side, a bucket sloshing with gray water on the other. His shoulders bent slightly, as though burdened by a weight heavier than his tools, and his head stayed bowed, his face half hidden in the harsh fluorescent light. He was the kind of man one could easily pass by without noticing at all. Most people did. They brushed past him without a glance, tossing papers into his trash can without a word. Coffee cups were abandoned on desks, left for him to collect. Sometimes there were jokes whispered loud enough for him to hear. "Careful, don't slip, old man." Someone chuckled as he mopped near the elevator. Another time, a manager sneered. "That's what happens when you don't get a real degree. You end up with a mop in your hand." The laughter of others followed, bouncing off the walls like a cruel echo. The man said nothing. He did not look at them. He simply kept cleaning, as though their words carried no weight. But his shoulders stiffened for a fleeting second, and his eyes flickered with something unspoken before returning to the floor. Not everyone ignored him. One employee noticed him when no one else did. Something about the janitor drew attention, not pity, but curiosity. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity in his silence, or the sense that he was far more than what others assumed. It began with the smallest of gestures, holding the elevator door open one morning and offering him a nod. "Good morning," the employee said. At first, the janitor looked startled, as though those words weren't meant for him. Then, slowly, a small smile broke through his weary expression. "Morning," he replied, his voice low, uncertain, as if kindness itself had caught him off guard. What seemed like nothing to one person meant everything to another. From that day, the greetings continued, a nod in the hallway, eye contact when speaking, a smile. They were not directed at a uniform or a mop bucket, but at the man himself. And though the employee did not know it then, the janitor was noticing in return. While others treated him like furniture, he was recording everything not on paper or a clipboard, but in a secret ledger written in his mind. He watched who thanked him and who didn't, who held doors and who let them slam, who mocked him and who chose silence. Each small exchange became an answer to a test no one knew they were taking. Because the truth was, he wasn't just a janitor. His mop and cart were only a disguise. Behind the faded uniform was a man with a story bigger than anyone could have guessed. And while the world dismissed him, one simple good morning had already begun to change everything. Weeks rolled into months, yet the pace of the office never slowed. Every morning, the building buzzed with energy phones ringing, keyboards clattering, voices sharp with urgency. Meetings spilled into hallways, and employees carried their coffee cups like a fuel for a race that never ended. Through it all, the janitor remained, pushing his cart, mopping floors, polishing glass, moving in steady silence. To most, he was just part of the background, no more noticeable than the hum of the lights or the shine on the glass doors. But to one observer, he was impossible to ignore. The more attention paid to him, the clearer it became that something about him didn't fit. The first signs were subtle. One morning, a group of employees crowded around a jammed printer, muttering complaints and smacking its side as though force would fix it. The janitor walked over, glanced at the machine once, and pressed 3 buttons in sequence. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the clean sheets as though nothing had ever been wrong. He offered no explanation, gave no smile, only a nod before returning to his cart. The employees shrugged and carried on, dismissing the moment. But the one who noticed him could not forget how effortlessly he had solved what baffled others. Then came the break room incident. A spreadsheet sat open on the table, columns of numbers stretched across the page. As the janitor wiped the counters, his eyes flicked over the data. Under his breath, he muttered, "Margins are bleeding on that one. Costs rising faster than revenue." He did not look up, did not elaborate, simply moved on as though he had said nothing at all. But those were not the words of a man who lived by sweeping floors. They were the words of someone who understood business, someone fluent in numbers, someone who carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent years in boardrooms. Other moments followed. His hands moved with a precision too deliberate to be dismissed as habit. His posture, when he thought no one was looking, straightened with the sharpness of a leader, not the slump of a tired worker. His expression, fleetingly, carried a weight that did not belong to a man hidden behind a mop. It was as though glimpses of a hidden self slipped through the cracks of his disguise. Whispers began to circulate among employees. Some claimed to have heard him speaking fluent French on the phone late one evening, his words fluid and confident. Another swore they had seen him step out of a sleek black car, a driver opening the door for him before he disappeared into the night. Most laughed these stories off immediately. "The janitor's a millionaire. Don't be ridiculous." Their laughter was sharp, mocking, dismissive. But the whispers did not die. Rumors spread in the cafeteria, twisted into cruel speculation. "Hez hiding from something," one intern suggested. "Probably a criminal past." Another smirked. "Or maybe he's just crazy." People love making up stories about nobodies. To them, it was entertainment gossip that filled empty minutes. To the one who had watched him more closely, it was something else entirely. Proof that this man carried secrets larger than the hallways he cleaned. Most unsettling were the quiet conversations he shared with the one person who acknowledged him. They were never about cleaning or schedules, but about life itself. Stories of planting seeds in poor soil, fishermen who knew when to draw in their nets, builders who cut corners only to watch their work collapse. On the surface, they sounded ordinary, but beneath them lay lessons about patience, risk, and vision, woven into parables meant for those willing to listen. They were not the words of a janitor. They were the wisdom of a man who had once stood at the edge of power. One night, long after most employees had gone home, His words struck like a quiet thunderbolt. Still pushing his mop without looking up, he said, "Funny thing about people titles make them think they're untouchable. Take the title away, and all you're left with is the truth of who they are." His voice was calm, almost casual, but the weight of it lingered. By the time the listener turned to question him, he was already gone, his cart squeaking down the hall. The questions grew heavier. Who was this man? Why did his words sound like the voice of someone who had once commanded authority? Why did his eyes carry the depth of a life lived far beyond the janitor's closet? Most dismissed him, still mocking, still blind. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable and waiting. The whispers would not remain whispers forever. Soon the mask would begin to slip. The morning carried an unease that clung to the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. From the moment employees walked through the gleaming glass doors, there was a tension that could be felt in every corner. Conversations were sharper, footsteps more hurried, papers shuffled with agitation rather than efficiency. The building, usually humming with the rhythm of routine, felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. No one knew it yet, but something was about to break. The trigger came in the form of a missing laptop. A sleek, high-end machine belonging to a senior manager had vanished from a conference room. Within minutes, the whispers began. Someone's stolen it. Security's checking. It has to be someone inside. The words spread like sparks in dry grass, carried on hushed voices that grew bolder with each retelling. In a place where image meant everything, blame was a shield, and everyone was desperate to make sure the target wasn't them. And almost instantly, the suspicion found its mark. The janitor. Eyes shifted toward him as he pushed his rattling cart down the hallway. His faded uniform, his bent shoulders, his mop and bucket, it all became fuel for the narrative they wanted to believe. "Makes sense," someone muttered darkly. "Who else would need the money?" Another voice joined, louder, dripping with mockery. "Always lurking near offices, hanging around like Hez, listening." I knew something was off about him. And, like vultures circling, others chimed in, their voices gathering strength, their accusations growing crueler with every repetition. The man at the center of it all did not fight back. He did not protest. His hands rested calmly on the handle of his cart, his eyes lowered, his expression unreadable. It was as though he had seen this moment coming long before anyone else had, as though he had been waiting for the storm to arrive. But to the one person watching closely, the silence was not indifference. Behind his stillness was something raw flicker of pain in his eyes, the heavy shadow of a man condemned without cause. The mob had found its scapegoat, and no one dared to speak for him. No one except one. He didn't take it. The words rang out with the clarity of a bell. Every head turned. Conversations died instantly. The office, moments ago alive with accusations, fell into a silence so sharp it cut. All eyes shifted to the speaker, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disdain. "And how would you know that?" one voice challenged, mocking and suspicious. Another sneered. "Oh, look at that, the janitor's little defender." Their laughter tried to smother the courage in the words that had been spoken, but the defense did not falter. The explanation came. The janitor had been seen on another floor at the very time the laptop disappeared. There was no evidence against Hymanly assumption, only the prejudice of those too eager to point a finger. The words trembled at first, but grew steadier with every breath. What began as a shaky defense transformed into a defiant stand, not only for the janitor, but for the truth itself. Security was summoned. Cameras were reviewed. The minutes stretched on unbearably, every second heavy with the weight of injustice. The accused remained silent, unmoving, as though he already knew what would come. And then, at last, the truth appeared on the screen. The footage revealed the thief, not the janitor, not the invisible man with the mop, but the very manager who had shouted the loudest against him. There he was, slipping into the conference room, glancing around nervously, then walking out with the laptop hidden under his arm. The silence that followed was thunderous. Shock washed over the office like a tidal wave. Gasps escaped lips. Eyes widened. The same mouths that had hurled accusations now stumbled over excuses. I didn't know, I just assumed I thought their voices withered into shameful quiet. And still the janitor did not gloat. He did not smirk. He did not even look at the man who had wronged him so viciously. He simply stood there, calm and steady, as though he had trusted all along that the truth would find its way. His gaze rose only once, meeting the eyes of the one person who had dared to defend him, and in that moment a bond was sealed not of gratitude, but of recognition. As the crowd dispersed, embarrassed and humiliated, the janitor pushed his cart forward. The squeak of its wheels echoed against the marble floors. As he passed his defender, his voice broke the silence, low and steady. It's easy to stand with the crowd. Harder to stand when you're the only one. His words carried the weight of a lesson, a warning, and a test, all at once. Then he turned the corner, vanishing from sight. But his words lingered, echoing long into the night. For the one who had spoken up, sleep was impossible. His silence was not weakness. His patience was not surrender. He had been watching all along, watching how people treated him when they thought he was powerless. And now it was clear. The janitor had been testing not ambition, not intellect, but character. And the tests were only growing harder. The mask he wore was about to slip. The days after the accusation carried with them a strange quiet, the kind that clings to walls long after thunder has passed. On the surface, the office moved as it always did. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, printers spit out endless streams of paper. Meetings piled up, coffee cups cluttered desks, and deadlines consumed conversations. Yet beneath all of it was a silence that hummed like a low current, unspoken, uneasy, undeniable. People avoided the subject of the janitor as if speaking his name might awaken the memory of their cruelty. The shame of their laughter, the sting of their careless accusations lingered too close for comfort. Co-workers who once mocked him now shifted uneasily when the one who had defended him walked by. Some couldn't meet their colleagues' eyes, their guilt plain in every forced smile. Others tried too hard to act normal, chattering about trivial things as though the silence hadn't exposed them. But for those who had truly paid attention, the memory of that day could not be erased. The janitor himself seemed unchanged, though those who watched closely knew better. He was there every morning, pushing his squeaking cart past the elevators. He was there every evening, polishing glass, doors long after the office had emptied. Yet in those quiet hours, when only a few remained, his words grew sharper, his lessons heavier. One night, as he emptied a bin beside the last lit desk, he murmured, "Funny how quickly people forget their own words when truth embarrasses them." Another evening, while mopping near the exit, he spoke softly without looking up. Character is revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when you've been cornered. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the weight of his words stayed long after he disappeared into the hallway shadows. He never lingered for response. He spoke, and then he was gone, leaving riddles behind, as if daring others to recognize their meaning. And then, without warning, he vanished. It was a Monday morning, ordinary in every way until the absence revealed itself. The elevator doors opened as they always did, spilling out employees juggling briefcases and steaming cups of coffee. But the corner by the elevators, his corner was empty. No cart, no mop, no weary figure with bent shoulders and watchful eyes. At first, the emptiness seemed trivial, easy to dismiss. Perhaps he was late. Perhaps he had been reassigned to another floor. But, as hours dragged on, it became impossible to ignore. He wasn't coming. By noon, a replacement arrived. A younger man, uniform pressed and shoes still stiff with newness, pushed a cart with brisk efficiency. His mop slapped against the tiles with practiced movements, his eyes locked firmly on the ground. He spoke to no one, acknowledged no one. When asked casually where the older janitor had gone, the new hire only shrugged. No idea. They just told me to cover this floor. His tone was flat, indifferent, carrying none of the quiet weight the older man had once carried in silence. To him, it was just a job, but to those who had grown used to the presence of the man before him, it felt as though the building itself had lost something it could never get back. Most employees hardly noticed. Some assumed he had retired. Others smirked, saying he'd probably been fired. Guess he finally gave up, one laughed, tossing a crumpled paper into the bin without looking. Their laughter was sharp, shallow, empty, just as careless as it had always been. To them, he had never mattered. He was invisible, replaceable, nothing more than a uniform and a mop. But to the one who had watched him, his absence was unsettling, even haunting. The halls seemed colder without him. The squeak of the cartwheels, once dismissed as background noise, now felt like a sound missing from the heartbeat of the building. Every time the new janitor passed by, silent and detached, the memory of the older one's words rose in the air. Lessons about truth, character, patience. His absence did not erase him, it amplified him. Days passed, then weeks. He never returned. In the void he left behind, rumors bloomed like weeds. Some whispered he had fallen ill. Others speculated he had been hiding a criminal past. A few suggested he had simply vanished because he had finally been caught doing something wrong. Each rumor was repeated with smug certainty, as if cruelty could explain away the weight of his presence. But none of the rumors satisfied the one person who had truly seen him, because deep down they knew this man was deliberate. Every action, every silence, every word he had spoken had carried purpose. He did not vanish without reason. And then the letter arrived. It came quietly, without ceremony, slipped into a mailbox as the sun dipped below the horizon. At first, it seemed ordinary, another envelope among the bills and advertisements. White, plain, unmarked except for a single detail. A name typed neatly across the front. Not resident, not occupant, but the name of the one person who had looked past the mop and uniform. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped with the letterhead of a law office. The message was brief, its language formal and precise, a request to attend the reading of a will. Confusion clouded every thought. A will? Surely there had been a mistake. But then the name appeared at the bottom of the page. Henry Caldwell. The world seemed to tilt. The breath caught in the throat. Henry Caldwell. For 3 years he had been the janitor. For 3 years he had been a shadow in faded fabric, a man with a mop. But now his true name had been revealed in ink Henry Caldwell, a name that carried the weight of something far larger, far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. The man who had vanished had not simply walked away. He had left behind a secret, sealed in the ink of a will. And that secret was about to change everything. The day of the will reading unfolded like the beginning of a story too impossible to be true. From the moment the invitation had arrived, a plain envelope slipped discreetly into a mailbox. It had carried with it a weight that could not be ignored. For days the letter had sat on the desk, folded and unfolded until the creases ran deep like scars. The name printed across the top of the page had echoed over and over in the mind of the one who read it. Henry Caldwell. Now, standing at the threshold of a law office that smelled faintly of cedarwood and ink, the significance of that name pressed down like a storm cloud ready to break. Inside, the air was hushed, reverent. Walls paneled with dark mahogany loomed on either side, and shelves lined with leather-bound tomes stretched upward like guardians of a legacy. The carpet muffled every step, demanding quiet respect from all who walked upon it. The waiting room was filled with faces marked by polish and privilege. Men in tailored suits adjusted their cufflinks with practiced arrogance. Women, draped in glittering jewelry, whispered behind manicured nails. Their eyes flicked toward the newcomer, the one who did not fit, the one who seemed out of place among the wealthy. Their glances were sharp, dismissive, full of the silent question, "What are you doing here?" But beneath their polished exteriors lay hunger. None of them had come to mourn. They had come to claim. At last, the door opened with deliberate slowness. A tall man emerged, carrying a presence as commanding as the silence he brought with him. His suit was crisp, his glasses perched firmly on his nose, and the leather briefcase in his hand seemed almost ceremonial. He surveyed the room with a measured glance that hushed every whisper. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm and sonorous. "Please, follow me." The group rose as one and moved into a long conference room. The air inside was heavy, expectant. A mahogany table stretched across the space, polished to a mirror-like sheen. Brass lamps cast a golden glow, their light dancing across the surface like firelight on water. At the center of the table rested a thick folder, pristine and waiting, its edges sharp against the wood. It was a folder that contained secrets, decisions, and the power to reshape lives in an instant. They took their seats. Some leaned back with entitlement, legs crossed, eyes sharp with anticipation. Others leaned forward, barely hiding their eagerness. But for the one who had received the plain envelope days earlier, the seat felt too large, the table too vast, the air too heavy. Their heart thundered in their chest, every breath uneven. The lawyer placed the folder before him and opened it with deliberate care, as though unveiling something sacred. "We are gathered here," he began, his voice steady and deep, "for the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Henry Caldwell." The name struck the room like lightning. Caldwell. Murmurs erupted instantly, sharp and urgent. Some gasped, others stiffened in shock. To most in the room, the name was familiar, etched into buildings, stamped on documents, printed across checks. Caldwell Industries, a name synonymous with wealth, with power, with empire. But for the one who had known him only as a janitor, the name was a revelation that shook the very ground beneath them. Henry Caldwell. Not the weary man in a faded uniform, not the quiet figure with a mop and bucket, but Henry Caldwell, the founder, the majority shareholder, the billionaire hiding in plain sight. The lawyer's voice carried on, cutting through the storm of whispers. For the past 3 years, Mr. Caldwell chose to conceal his identity and wealth. He wished to see the truth of those around him, how they treated a man they believed had nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating. Faces paled. Eyes dropped. Everyone remembered. They remembered the ignored greetings, the cruel jokes whispered within earshot, the times they brushed past him as if he were nothing. The memory of their contempt now burned hot against their skin. Some clenched their jaws in quiet shame. Others hardened their expressions, unwilling to accept blame. But the truth was undeniable. Henry Caldwell had seen everything. The lawyer began to read the bequests. To some, small amounts donations hardly worth the ink on the paper. To others, nothing at all. The room rippled with outrage. "This is absurd," one man shouted, his voice trembling with fury. "I gave him years of my life." Another slammed his hand against the table, his ring clattering like a gavel. "This isn't right. He owed us more." Their voices grew louder, angrier, echoing off the polished walls. But the lawyer pressed forward, unshaken, until he reached the final page. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and read aloud words that froze the room in stunned silence. "To the one who saw me as more than a mop. To the one who showed kindness when there was no reason to. To the one who treated me as a man, not a shadow. I leave the remainder of my estate, valued at $3.8 billion. The air fractured. Gasps cut through the silence. Whispers hissed. Heads turned in unison, eyes burning into the outsider at the table, the one who had greeted him, spoken to him, acknowledged him when no one else would. Their faces twisted with shock, envy, rage. $3.8 billion. The number echoed in every mind. Impossible to comprehend. Impossible to accept. Chaos erupted. Voices rose in a storm of fury and disbelief. "She doesn't deserve it," one woman shrieked, her diamond bracelet flashing under the light. "This is madness," another man bellowed, slamming his fist against the table. Some shouted accusations, claims of fraud, manipulation, seduction. Their words were poison, dripping with jealousy and desperation. But none of it mattered. The will was binding. The decision was final. Henry Caldwell had chosen. The one who had once offered a simple good morning now sat in stunned silence beneath the weight of billions. Every small act of kindness, every nod, every word of respect that once seemed insignificant, now revealed itself as the foundation of everything. The janitor had not been testing skill. He had not been measuring ambition. He had been testing humanity. And now, his fortune, his empire, his legacy had been placed in the hands of the only one who passed. The room did not merely react to the lawyer's words, it detonated. For a moment, there was silence, so sharp and fragile you could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock against the far wall. And then the eruption came. Voices rose at once, a wave of disbelief and outrage crashing into the air, drowning out the calm, measured tone of the man who had just read the will. Chairs screeched backward, heels struck the floor, and the polished dignity of the conference room shattered into chaos. You sat frozen, your breath stuck in your chest, your heart pounding so hard you thought it might break through your ribs. It was impossible to process, impossible to believe. The billionaire janitor, the man who had pushed a mop in silence, the man most dismissed as invisible, had chosen you. His voice, though now only ink on paper, echoed in your mind. To the only one who cared. Around you, faces twisted in grotesque shapes of rage and envy. Some shouted accusations, their hands slamming down against the polished wood of the table as if the sheer force of their anger could undo the decision. Others leaned back in their chairs, mouths hanging open, eyes wide with disbelief, muttering the same question over and over. Why her? Why not me? She's a fraud. A man barked from across the room, his expensive cufflinks glinting under the light. There's no way this is real. She must have manipulated him. His words were sharp, bitter, designed to poison the air around you. She was nothing to him, another woman hissed, her lips curling back as if she had tasted something foul. Her diamonds caught the light, but nothing could hide the ugliness in her expression. Nothing but a nobody. And now she thinks she deserves all this? You wanted to shrink, to disappear into your chair, but the weight of every stare pressed into your skin, suffocating you. The whispers burned like fire at the back of your neck. Rumors were already blooming in the corners of the room, lies twisting into roots that would spread like wildfire. You could almost hear them growing. She must have seduced him. She must have tricked him. There's no way he chose her for something as simple as kindness. But amid the storm, one steady voice remained. The lawyer raised his hand, his tone calm, authoritative, and unwavering. Mr. Caldwell's wishes are final. This will is legal, binding, and indisputable. There is no room for contest. His words cut through the chaos like a blade, but they did little to soothe the fury boiling in the room. Some stormed out, slamming the heavy doors behind them so hard the walls seemed to tremble. Others stayed, their anger simmering, their eyes narrowing as they locked on you, their silence more dangerous than their screams. You could feel the envy radiating from them like heat, as though they were already plotting, already calculating what they could do to take away what had just been given to you. And then, slowly, a realization dawned within you, so heavy it nearly knocked the breath from your lungs. He hadn't chosen you out of randomness. He hadn't chosen you out of pity. He had chosen you because of who you had been in those moments when no one else was watching. The small, ordinary gestures you had thought meant nothing had been everything to him. The smile you offered when others sneered. The cup of coffee you had once left for him when he looked tired. The way you acknowledged him in the hallways when everyone else treated him like furniture. To you, they were fragments, forgettable details in the blur of your days. To him, they were proof of character, proof of humanity, proof that wealth could never buy what he was truly searching for. Your fingers trembled as you folded the letter, your eyes stinging with tears you tried to hold back. For the first time since the announcement, your chest loosened not with relief, but with something deeper, a weight of gratitude, a weight of responsibility. The lawyer closed the folder, his voice steady. This concludes the reading of the will. You will be contacted shortly regarding the estate transfer and all necessary arrangements. His words sounded surreal, as if they belonged to a different world, a world that could not possibly be yours. Estate transfer, assets, fortune, billions. You stood slowly, every muscle trembling, your legs unsteady as though the floor beneath you had shifted. The room parted reluctantly, the others moving aside with thinly veiled contempt, their gazes slicing into you as you walked past. Some sneered openly, others whispered, their voices sharp and poisonous, but all of them followed you with their eyes, unwilling to let go of their hatred. When you finally stepped out into the hallway, the air felt colder, heavier. carrying with it the echoes of every accusation and every threat unspoken. The walls themselves seemed to hum with tension, as if they too understood the storm you had just walked into. And in that silence, one truth pressed itself into your chest with unshakable force. This was not the end of the test. This was the beginning of another. Because inheriting his fortune was not a gift without consequence. It was a burden, one that painted a target on your back and set the world's eyes on you. And the storm that had begun inside that conference room was nothing compared to what awaited you outside its doors. When the heavy doors of the law office closed behind them, the silence outside was suffocating. The marble steps felt colder beneath their shoes, and the city beyond buzzed with its usual rhythm horns honking, strangers rushing past with coffee cups, shop windows glowing with polished displays. The world moved on as if nothing had changed, but for the one walking down those steps, everything had. In their chest sat the crushing knowledge that $3.8 billion, an empire, a legacy, a life's worth of power, now bore their name. And yet, instead of feeling larger, they felt smaller, as though the weight of it threatened to collapse their shoulders inward. Across the street, cameras glinted like hungry eyes in the sun. Reporters had gathered, tipped off by whispers of the will's shocking contents. Their voices rose like a swarm, each one calling the name of the new heir, questions hurled with desperation. How does it feel to inherit his fortune? Did you know Henry Caldwell personally? Do you think you deserve it? Their microphones jutted forward like weapons, each flash of the camera slicing the air with sharp, merciless light. Instinctively, the heir pulled their coat tighter around themselves and hurried away. But the escape was temporary, because once word spread, and it already had, there would be no hiding. That night, the apartment that had once been a sanctuary felt more like a cage. The phone would not stop buzzing. Unknown numbers filled the screen, one after another. Some were voices dripping with false congratulations, their words wrapped in counterfeit warmth. Others were direct demands, pleas for loans, promises of partnerships, offers too suspiciously rehearsed to be genuine. And then there were the cruel ones, accusations that the inheritance was undeserved, threats hidden behind careful words, envy spilling through the receiver in every syllable. Even when the phone was finally silenced, the quiet brought no peace. The walls seemed to press in. Every shadow stretched too far. Every creak in the floorboards felt like an intruder's step. The fortune had set them free from financial struggle, yes, but it had also shackled them to a new kind of fear. The world no longer saw a person. It saw opportunity. Letters began to arrive, thick envelopes slipped under the door or dropped into the mailbox. Some begged for help, written in shaky handwriting, full of tragic stories and desperate hope. Others were venomous, accusing them of stealing, of tricking a vulnerable old man, of seducing him for wealth. The ugliest dripped with hatred, words scrawled in angry ink. That money was never yours. You'll pay for this. Each letter weighed heavier than the last. Each one pressed the truth deeper into the chest of the heir. Inheriting a fortune did not just make them rich, it made them a target. Sleep became a stranger. Nights blurred into one another, spent lying awake and staring at the ceiling, ears straining for every sound, the groan of the pipes in the walls, the hum of the refrigerator, the tap of the wind against the glass. Every noise felt like a warning. Every flicker of shadow whispered of unseen dangers. And yet, beneath the fear, another weight grew heavier still, the responsibility. For it wasn't just money that Henry Caldwell had left behind. It was his legacy, his faith, his belief that kindness mattered more than power, that humanity mattered more than status. The janitor, who was never just a janitor, had seen something in them that no one else had bothered to see. And in leaving them everything, he had placed that torch into their hands. It was not a prize. It was a burden, a mission. And that realization was both terrifying and strengthening. They thought back to the quiet moments, the faint smile he gave when greeted, the cryptic wisdom he shared in empty hallways, the way his eyes carried a sorrow that seemed too deep for a man pushing a mop. He had been preparing them all along, not with instructions, but with lessons. Seeds planted in silence that now bloomed when they were needed most. But the outside world did not care about legacies or lessons. It cared about money, about envy, about power. And the air knew with a cold certainty that storms far greater than the one in the conference room were gathering. Lawsuits, betrayals, schemes. They would come like waves, relentless and unending. Standing at the window that night, the city glittering like broken glass below, they whispered into the dark, voice trembling but determined. I won't waste what you left me. I won't let them destroy me. But as the words left their lips, another truth echoed silently back. This was not only a battle against others, it was a battle against themselves. Because sudden wealth has a way of reshaping people, bending them, tempting them into greed and corruption. And, if they weren't careful, the fortune meant to be a blessing could just as easily become a curse. That was the unspoken test Henry Caldwell had left behind. Could they remain the same person he had chosen? The one who saw him as more than a mopor, would the weight of inheritance slowly change them into everything he had despised? The nights were the hardest. When the world went quiet and the noise of the day could no longer distract you, that's when the doubts crept in. You'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why he chose you. Out of all the people in that building, out of all the faces that passed him by, why you? And then, as though the silence itself carried his voice, the memories came back. The lessons he had dropped so casually, disguised as small talk, hidden in the rhythm of ordinary days. You remembered how, once, you found him sitting alone in the break room, a janitor with a sandwich wrapped in foil, eating slowly while everyone else avoided his table. You had sat down across from him, just to keep him company. And, without looking up, he had said, "You can tell everything about a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." At the time, it sounded like an observation, something an old man might mutter. But now, those words throbbed in your mind like a warning bell. Another time, you caught him staring out the window on a rainy afternoon. The sky was heavy, dripping, the streets below slick with silver light. He turned to you and asked, "Do you know what the strongest people in the world are? Not the rich, not the powerful. The ones who choose kindness when cruelty is easier." You had smiled politely, not realizing then that he was planting seeds inside you, seeds that would grow into strength when you needed it most. Now, with the fortune sitting in accounts that bore your name, those seeds bloomed into clarity. He hadn't chosen you randomly. He had seen something in the way you greeted him, in the way you listened, in the way you acknowledged his humanity when everyone else erased it. He hadn't just been testing kindness. He had been leaving behind an invisible compass, one you would need to navigate the storms ahead. But the strangest thing was how present he felt. Sometimes you swore you could hear his mop bucket squeak in the hallways, echoing faintly in your memory. Sometimes you felt his gaze in the mirror, calm and steady, reminding you not to lose yourself. He was gone, yet not gone. Every lesson he left behind clung to you like armor, wrapping itself around your spirit, whispering guidance when fear tried to take over. The world outside pressed harder each day. Strangers demanded, enemies whispered, lawyers circled like vultures. And yet, you found yourself repeating his words in your head like prayers. Kindness when cruelty is easier. Strength in how you treat the powerless. Guard what matters, not just what shines. And slowly, the panic that had once consumed you began to sharpen into resolve. His ghost wasn't haunting you. It was guiding you. You understood now. He hadn't just left you his fortune. He had left you a blueprint for surviving it. Still, there was one lesson he had never spoken out loud, one you would soon be forced to learn on your own. Because wealth does not just test your morals, it tests your courage. And the moment would come when you'd have to defend what he left you not just in court, but in the very fabric of your life. And when that moment arrived, you would discover whether his faith in you had been misplaced or whether you were truly ready to carry the weight of his legacy. It did not take long for the news to spread. By the next morning, the city was buzzing with the story, each retelling sharper than the last. A billionaire janitor leaves his entire fortune to an ordinary nobody. Headlines screamed it from newspapers. Blogs dissected it with venomous fascination. Television anchors spoke his name with disbelief, their voices dripping with the envy of those who could not imagine being chosen over powerful executives and blood relatives. The world no longer saw a person. They saw a headline, a symbol, a target. At first, the attacks came softly sideways glances, whispers that followed like shadows. The building where they had once been invisible became a stage for cruel fascination. Colleagues who used to pass without acknowledgement now stopped to stare, their expressions a mix of jealousy and suspicion. Conversations hushed when they entered a room, only to flare back up the moment they turned away. She doesn't deserve it. He must have been manipulated. No one gets $3.8 billion for nothing. The words spread like poison, infecting even the walls of the place that had once been ordinary. The same hallways where a quiet janitor once pushed his cart had transformed into a hunting ground of whispers and accusations. And then the vultures arrived. Lawyers representing long-lost relatives appeared with carefully worded documents, each one claiming that Henry Caldwell's will was invalid. They argued he had been senile, incapable of making sound decisions. They accused the heir of exploiting him, of weaving kindness into a trap, of manipulating a vulnerable old man for personal gain. Some went further, spinning elaborate stories of seduction and deceit, painting the heir as a schemer who had seen through Caldwell's disguise and pounced on the opportunity. The lawsuits piled up like storm clouds. Each envelope that arrived carried the same venom, each one dripping with accusations sharpened into weapons. Courtrooms became arenas, with strangers in expensive suits arguing over a life and legacy they had never truly known. The attacks did not end in legal papers. They bled into the streets, the screens, the very fabric of daily life. Reporters camped outside the apartment, their cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. Strangers shouted accusations from across sidewalks. Journalists dissected every detail of the heir's past, twisting mundane details into damning narratives. Online, their name became a battlefield. Comment sections swarmed with venom. strangers debating whether they deserved the inheritance, strangers who knew nothing about them, insisting they had cheated, lied, deceived. Even those once called friends began to change. Acquaintances who had long since drifted away suddenly reappeared, their smiles too wide, their arms too open. "We're so proud of you," they said, their voices sweet but their eyes sharp with calculation. Old classmates, distant relatives, people who had never once offered kindness now called daily, each conversation circling back to the same quiet demand: money. The heir's phone never stopped buzzing. Each message, each call was another reminder that the inheritance was not freedom but a chain. Freedom from struggle, yes, but shackled to endless demands, envy, and betrayal. The walls of their apartment no longer felt like protection. They felt like paper, thin and fragile against the weight pressing in from every side. And in the quiet moments, when exhaustion left them slumped against the window staring at the city lights, the heir realized something chilling. This was exactly what Caldwell had predicted. He had not chosen them because life would be easy. He had chosen them because he knew storms like this would come. The janitor, with bent shoulders and watchful eyes, had seen the truth of people, how quickly kindness could be twisted into cruelty, how fast the powerful could bare their teeth when denied what they thought was theirs. And now, those lessons were no longer theory. They were reality, pressing in like waves against stone. The storm outside was relentless, but the true test had only just begun. Because the heir was learning that enemies did not only lurk in courtrooms or behind cameras. Enemies could live much closer. Enemies could wear familiar faces. And soon, the cruelest wound of all would not come from strangers. It would come from within. The heir could endure the lawsuits. They could withstand the flashing cameras, the endless interviews, the strangers who spat their name like an accusation. They could even bear the venom of online mobs, their words sharpened into knives. All of that was survivable. All of that was expected. What they were not prepared for was the betrayal that came from within their own circle. At first, it was subtle. Small shifts, so delicate they almost went unnoticed. A friend of many years who once laughed easily now spoke with a clipped tone, their smile brittle at the edges. A cousin who had rarely called before now reached out constantly, their voice syrupy sweet, their words always circling back to the same topic: money. A neighbor who used to greet them with warmth now lingered too long in conversation, weaving compliments into questions that sounded less like care and more like calculated probes. The heir brushed it off at first, telling themselves that people simply changed when wealth entered the picture. Perhaps it was envy. Perhaps it was desperation. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. And then it struck. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the skyline, a knock came at the doorknob from a visitor, but from a courier holding a thick envelope. The seal was heavy, the kind used for official documents. With trembling fingers, the heir tore it open, their breath catching as their eyes scanned the words inside. It was another lawsuit. But this one was different. This time, the name on the document was not a stranger's. It was not a long-lost relative. It was not an opportunistic lawyer. It was someone they trusted. Someone who had been welcomed into their home, shared meals at their table, laughed with them in softer times. Someone who had stood close enough to know their secrets. The betrayal hollowed them like a blade pressed against the chest. The accusations were brutal. The trusted one claimed the heir had manipulated Henry Caldwell. They argued that every act of kindness had been a performance, carefully crafted to win the favor of a lonely old man. They painted a picture of greed hidden beneath a mask of compassion, twisting gestures of humanity into weapons of deceit. Words that once belonged to memories of trust were now reshaped into daggers, each one aimed with precision to destroy. The air sat frozen, the document trembling in their hands, their heart pounding with disbelief. Each paragraph was a distortion of truth, each accusation laced with intimate details only a confidant could know. They could see it now, the subtle questions, the carefully worded conversations, the times they had trusted too openly. All of it had been collected, reshaped, and turned against them. The weight of it was unbearable. Nights blurred into days as the betrayal dug deeper. It wasn't just legal, it was personal. The one they trusted had used their closeness as a weapon, their intimacy as ammunition. The wound cut deeper than any courtroom battle, because this was not about strangers clawing for money. This was about trust being shattered from within. There were moments when the air wanted to scream, to call them, to demand answers. Why? Was it envy? Was it greed? Or had betrayal always lingered, in their heart, waiting for the moment to strike? But no answer could undo what had already been done. The damage was written in black ink, filed in courtrooms, whispered into the ears of those who were eager to believe. And yet, amid the heartbreak, a memory returned. Henry Caldwell's steady gaze, the way his eyes had seemed to see through masks with effortless clarity. The way he had once said, "It's easy to stand with the crowd, harder to stand when you're the only one." Perhaps he had foreseen this too. Perhaps he had known that betrayal would not only come from the outside, but from those close enough to wound the deepest. And perhaps this was why he had chosen so carefully, why he had trusted only one to carry his legacy. The air felt something shift within them. The pain of betrayal burned, yes, but beneath it rose something stronger. Resolve. Because this was no longer about wealth. It was no longer about surviving lawsuits or calming public outrage. This was about defending dignity, truth, and the faith Henry Caldwell had placed in them. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also awakened a fire. And in that fire came a new clarity. If they could endure being stabbed in the back by someone they trusted, then there was nothing left in this world that could truly break them. Still, one question lingered like a shadow in the corner of their mind. If betrayal could come from within, then where else would the knives strike from next? The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its stone facade casting long shadows across the steps that led up to its doors. The air outside was thick with noise reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking like machine gun fire, onlookers whispering as the air passed. To the crowd, this wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle, a stage where wealth, betrayal, and truth would collide under the gaze of a hungry audience. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier still. The courtroom was packed to the brim, every bench filled with faces eager to watch the drama unfold. Former colleagues, distant relatives, neighbors who once waved politely from across fences, all sat shoulder to shoulder with strangers and journalists, their eyes sharp, their whispers cutting. To them, this was not about justice. It was entertainment. The heir sat at the defendant's table, their hands trembling slightly against the polished wood, their heart pounding loud enough to drown out the murmurs. Across the aisle sat the betrayer, the trusted one who had twisted kindness into accusation. Their expression was smug, confident, a mask of righteousness that barely concealed the greed burning beneath. Their lawyer shuffled papers with crisp efficiency, preparing to paint the heir as a liar, a manipulator, a wolf in sheep's clothing who had preyed on Henry Caldwell's supposed fragility. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. All rise. The room stood in unison as the judge entered, robes flowing like shadows, gavel clutched in hand. When the command came to be seated, the air sank into an expectant hush, and, with a sharp rap of wood against wood, the trial began. The betrayer's side struck first. Their attorney wasted no time in building a narrative of manipulation and deceit. Witnesses were paraded before the court co-workers, distant acquaintances, each one offering fragments of half-truths and suspicions. They claimed Henry Caldwell had been frail, confused, vulnerable. They painted him as a lonely old man easily swayed by flattery, desperate for companionship. And the heir? They were painted as the predator, the smiling deceiver, the opportunist who saw through the disguise of a janitor and plotted carefully to inherit an empire. The words were venom, delivered with precision. Each accusation landed like a blow, drawing gasps from the audience, stirring whispers like dry leaves in the wind. The heir sat still, their chest tight, their fingers clenched so tightly around their notes that the paper crumpled. Every twisted memory, every distorted moment, felt like a knife twisting deeper. But then it was their lawyer's turn. Calm, steady, unshaken. Their presence was a quiet storm, deliberate and controlled. With every question, with every carefully chosen phrase, the lies began to unravel. The defense produced documents journals, letters, notes written by Henry Caldwell himself. Pages filled with his sharp handwriting, each one proving clarity of mind, each one revealing his deliberate plan to live as a janitor in order to test character. The courtroom shifted. Gasps rose again, but this time with a different edge shock, disbelief, the dawning awareness that the man they had dismissed for years had orchestrated something far greater than anyone imagined. But the true blow came not from paper, but from a voice. A screen was wheeled into the courtroom, a projector humming softly as the lawyer pressed play. And suddenly, Henry Caldwell filled the room, not the janitor with bent shoulders, not the silent man with a mop, but the billionaire himself. His voice was deep, steady, deliberate. "If you are watching this," he began, "then I am gone. And I know there will be those who try to twist my choice, to claim manipulation, to paint falsehoods in the name of greed. But let it be clear, my will is no accident. I leave my fortune, my legacy, my trust to the one person who treated me as more than a mop, the one who cared when no one else did." The courtroom froze. The silence was absolute. Even the judge leaned back, visibly stunned, as the words reverberated off the walls. The betrayer paled, their mask cracking as the weight of Caldwell's voice crushed their carefully spun lies. The heir sat motionless, their chest tight, their eyes burning. To hear his voice again, to feel his presence in that room, it was like he had returned from beyond the grave to defend them himself. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The will stands. Case dismissed. The uproar began instantly, journalists rushing out with headlines already forming in their mouths, spectators muttering in shock, the betrayer crumbling under the collapse of their own scheme. But for the heir, the noise faded into nothing. Because all they could hear, all they could cling to, was the echo of Henry Caldwell's final words. He had not left them alone in this fight. He had spoken for them. He had silenced every accusation with a truth that could never be broken. When they stepped out of the courtroom, the sunlight felt different. Brighter, sharper, almost blinding. Victory should have felt like freedom, but the air knew better. This was not the end of the storm. It was only one battle in a war Henry Caldwell had known would come, because if he had left behind letters, journals, and even his recorded voice, then what else had he prepared? What final revelation still waited to be discovered? Victory in the courtroom should have felt like the end of the nightmare, but it did not. The air walked out of the courthouse surrounded by noise reporters shouting, cameras flashing, onlookers stretching their necks to catch a glimpse of the lucky nobody who had inherited billions. Yet beneath the chaos, there was a hollow space inside their chest, a sense that the battle had not ended at all. Because Henry Caldwell was not the kind of man who left stories unfinished. The very next day, a letter arrived. Unlike the thick envelopes stuffed with lawsuits and threats, this one was smaller, neater, and sealed with wax pressed into the imprint of a law office crest. Inside, the message was brief. You are requested to attend a private meeting at the office of Caldwell's attorney. He left something else for you. The air's breath caught. Something else? The law office was quieter this time, stripped of the storm of relatives and their fury. The air was still heavy, but now it carried something sharper anticipation. The lawyer greeted them with a calm nod and led them into a private room. The space was smaller than the grand conference hall of the will reading, but it carried its own weight. Bookshelves lined the walls, the scent of old paper mixing with polished wood. And on the table, waiting beneath the glow of a single brass lamp, sat a wooden box. It was plain, unassuming, yet it commanded the room like a relic. On its lid, carved by hand, was a single name, theirs. The heir's fingers trembled as they reached forward, tracing the grooves of the letters. It was not the cold type of a machine. It was hand-carved, each stroke deliberate. Henry Caldwell had touched this box. He had prepared it long before his death, knowing exactly who would sit here now. Open it, the lawyer said softly. Inside, bound together with rough twine, were letters. Dozens of them, stacked neatly like chapters of a story waiting to be told. The top envelope bore Caldwell's handwriting firm, precise, unmistakable. For you, when the truth is finally yours. The air pulled the letter free, the paper thick and heavy, the ink bold and alive. And as they began to read, his voice returned, not the quiet murmur of a janitor sweeping hallways, but the voice of a man who had lived at the peak of power. You probably thought this was about money, the letter began. It never was. Anyone can leave wealth. But true wealth is worthless without someone worthy to hold it. I became a janitor not to hide, but to see how people treated someone they believed could give them nothing. And you saw me, not the mop, not the uniform, me. That is why this fortune belongs to you. Tears stung their eyes as the words blurred, but they pressed on. Each letter went deeper than the last. Caldwell wrote of his life the rise of his empire, the betrayals that had stripped him of faith in humanity, the loneliness of wealth when no one saw the man behind the fortune. He confessed that disguising himself as a janitor had not only been a test for others, but for himself. He wanted to remember humility, to strip life down to its rawest form, to see if kindness still existed in a world consumed by greed. You think I left you billions, one letter read, but what I truly left you is responsibility, to guard this wealth from becoming poison, to use it not as a crown, but as a torch. You once gave me humanity when no one else would. Now I ask you to give it to the world. Beneath the letters lay more. Blueprints, plans, unfinished dreams. Investments in charities he had funded quietly, schools he wanted rebuilt, hospitals he had left in seed form, waiting for someone to bring them to life. He had already planted the roots. All that remained was for the air to water them. The final letter was shorter than the rest, written with the heavy strokes of a man nearing his end. Wealth is a mirror. It shows people who they truly are. Some will see greed, some will see envy, some will see opportunity. But in the right hands, wealth becomes something greater. It becomes a shield for the weak, a sword for justice, a seed for generations to come. Do not waste what I have left you. Do not let the world twist you into what I once despised. You saw me when I was invisible. That is why I chose you. Never forget character outlives wealth, but wealth in the right hands can outlive us all. The heir's hands trembled as the letter fell into their lap. Tears blurred their vision, spilling onto the paper, sealing it with their own promise. They understood now it had never been about the billions. It had been about carrying the weight of a legacy, about proving that kindness in a cruel world could still change everything. The janitor everyone ignored. The billionaire no one recognized. The man with a mop who had seen through the masks of the world. Henry Caldwell's final lesson thundered in the heir's heart. The truest test was never about money. It was about what they would do with it. And as the weight of the letters pressed against their chest, the heir knew one thing with certainty. Their life was no longer their own. The torch had been passed. The world was watching. And now it was their turn to rise,